Hello everyone, welcome to today's application seminar for round 11 of HNES. I'm Amy Taylor, I'm a marketing executive at GemServe, a talent company, which is the delivery partner for HNES. So first of all, I'll cover some quick housekeeping rules. Please mute your microphones to limit disruption during the session. If you're not speaking, please turn off webcams to improve video quality. We also have a Q&A function. If you'd like to ask any questions during the webinar, we'll try to answer the questions throughout the session, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. This webinar is being recorded and we will distribute the slides afterwards. So I'll just quickly run through the agenda. With Katie Ansari, our application and grant funding lead, and Louis Singleton, HNES program manager, who will be taking alternating sections. First of all, we'll be sharing an introduction to HNES and examples of funded projects. We'll then hear about optimization studies and the application process. Louise will then share insights on submitting an application, and Katie will talk you through the assessment process. Finally, Louise will be sharing support available for applicants, and we'll then host our Q&A section where the team will be on hand to answer any questions that you have. So without further ado, I will hand over to Louise to give an introduction to HNES.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining the webinar. So if we can go to the next slide. So I'm Louise Singleton, I'm the program manager for HNES. Some of you may already have heard some of this if you've been on previous webinars before, but just for those that are new, just want to state what the aims and objectives of HNES are. So we have three objectives. The first one is to reduce carbon emissions by making heat networks more efficient. So if we are issuing or letting energy and heat escape into the atmosphere, obviously we're creating more carbon than we need to. So we want to make sure that networks are operating as efficiently as possible, not using more energy than they need to, more fuel than they need to, and therefore reducing carbon emissions. The second one is about reducing customer detriment to improve consumer confidence. So there are two parts to this. The first one around reducing consumer detriment. Particularly over the last few years where we've had a rise in energy bills, and the government's focus is really on making sure that particularly those customers that are on low incomes or are in extra care homes or that really can't afford to pay for their bills anyway, aren't being adversely affected by being on an inefficient network and therefore having to pay more for heat that is just escaping out into the atmosphere. So we're really keen to make sure that we're supporting those customers that can't afford to heat their homes anyway. If you read our guidance for applicants document, there's a definition there around customers in need. So part of the application focuses on particularly if you're in a residential building, the makeup of the tenants in that building or the residents in that building, and trying to understand the sort of financial situation that they're in. So whether they're on benefits, whether it's affordable housing, really to understand how we're supporting those customers that can't afford to heat their homes. And the second part in terms of improving consumer confidence is the government is keen to increase the number of heat networks that there are in the country in order to meet our net zero targets. So improving consumer confidence is about making sure that those that are on existing heat networks are having a good experience, with the view that then that encourages others who aren't on a heat network now to join a heat network in the future. The third part here is around preparing the market for sector regulation and technical standards. So you may be aware of the Heat Network Technical Assurance Scheme that is coming down the line, and within that scheme there will be set performance targets or sort of efficiency levels or sort of how we would expect heat networks to function. And so part of HNES is helping to improve the performance of existing heat networks to bring those in line with future regulations as they are defined. If we move to the next slide. So we have two types of funding. We have revenue funding and capital funding. Revenue funding is for organizations that don't know, or heat networks that they know that their heat network isn't operating very well. They know they have multiple issues, but they don't know necessarily why they have those issues or what the right measures are to address those issues. So the revenue grant pays for an external consultant to come in, assess the network, understand its current performance, make recommendations for measures that could be improved and the kind of level of improvement that you could expect to see if you were to implement those measures. They'll give you information on costs of those measures as well, so return on investment, payback periods, with the idea that that document can then be used internally as a sort of business case to request that these measures are installed. So the kind of budget for these grants is between £15,000 and £24,000, including VAT. So that's the sort of the range of funding that's available. And then we have the capital grants funding, which is essentially to implement the measures that you know will improve the network. For revenue funding, it can be up to 100% funding within that funding range that I mentioned. For capital grants, it's part funding. So the grant can cover up to, but not including, 50% of the overall cost of the eligible measures. The rest needs to come from the applicants themselves. So it's part funding. For this funding round 11, capital projects will be able to apply for funding in next financial year, so from April 2026 through to March 2028. For revenue projects, it will just be for next financial year, 26-27. They have a shorter period for delivery, so they don't need to go into the next financial year yet. If you are applying across multiple years for the capital projects, the grant funding needs to be spent in the financial year it's allocated to. So if you asked for £500,000 and you asked for 100,000 in FY 26-27 and 400 in FY 27-28, if you didn't spend all that 100,000 in the year it's been allocated to, it would be lost. You can't just say, oh, overall I've got £500,000 so I can spend it across either years. So when you're completing your application form and you're specifying which funding years or which financial years you want your funding in, it's really important that you think carefully about your program plan, your timescales for delivery, and when you think you'll be able to spend the funding that you've requested. It's also worth noting that from a match funding perspective, you don't have to spend it at the same time as grant funding. So you might ask for, say, same example, £100,000 in FY 26-27, but you don't need to also spend £100,000 of match funding. You could spend your £100,000 in 26-27 and then all your match funding in 27-28, for example, depending on how your internal budgets align. Obviously, we want to make sure that the projects are completing and delivering the outcomes as soon as possible. So what we wouldn't want is a very small amount to be requested in 26-27 and all the works to be done in sort of 27-28, because that's essentially a year lost in a way. So it's worth considering whether how the timelines of your program and whether if you are looking to do more work in 27-28, whether actually applying in a later round would be more suitable, because obviously we want to make sure we're achieving the benefits as quickly as we can. But yeah, you don't have to spend your match funding at the same time as your grant funding. So next slide, please. In terms of what's eligible then for capital grants, so again, I mentioned we have a guidance for applicants document. It provides a lot more detail in there as to what is eligible. It's easier today to tell you what's not eligible. But yeah, again, I can take questions if people have want to ask a bit more about this. But essentially, we can cover anything from the energy centre all the way through to the dwellings to an extent, and also some elements of metering. But what we can't cover are things that have already happened prior to an HNES award being made. So not an HNES application being submitted, the actual funding award being made. So it's typically about 4 to 5 months from submission to you being notified whether or not you've been successful or not. At that point, anything after you've received your award letter would be eligible. Anything done prior to that can't be covered by the grant. Anything that's not related to heat network infrastructure, so we can't make improvements to building fabric, for example, that doesn't sit within the requirements of the scheme. Anything to do with engagement activities, so stakeholder management, internal project management. If your project is sufficiently large to warrant an external project manager, then we can cover the costs of that. But any internal staff costs, essentially where someone would already be employed by the organisation, we can't cover those costs. And then specifically in different elements of the network, so within the energy centre, we are unable to replace or cover the cost for replacing the primary heat generation source. So mainly the reason for that is we're an efficiency scheme. Simply replacing a boiler doesn't necessarily mean that your network is going to improve its efficiency if further down the network within sort of the primary, secondary, tertiary elements of the network, it's really inefficient. The kind of heat source needs to be kind of the last thing that you're doing to make sure you're sizing it correctly for the now efficient network. So we're not able to cover the costs of that. But if you do need to make changes to sort of pipe work, or you need to take offline the primary heat generation source to make your improvements, we can cover the cost of temporary boilers. So hiring of them, bringing them to site, taking them away from site, but we can't cover the fuel costs because that's not capital expenditure. On the tertiary side, so we can't cover replacing pipework or heat emitters within dwellings. So heat emitters being radiators, underfloor heating, things like that. So yeah, so none of that element can be covered. What we can do is things like system controls, so TRVs on radiators, for example. So things that will help residents to control their network, their part of the network better, but actually replacing radiators and things can't be covered. And finally, on a metering side, there's the heat network metering and billing regulations, which require certain heat networks to install meters. If you are required to install them through those regulations, then we can't cover them through HNES because you already have a legal requirement to install them. If you are exempt from the metering and billing regs, or you're going above and beyond what's required in the metering regulations, so elements of sub-metering, for example, then we can cover that part of metering. And then on the next slide, we talk about revenue grants. So again, in the guidance for applicants document, these slides will be shared afterwards, so you'll have the links, but we can also put the links in the chat, I think, to the document. We set out in Annex A of that document what we expect to see from an optimization study. So you can see what you, and also, I guess, what you should expect as a client of a consultant, what should be covered by that optimization study. Again, similarly as to the capital works, any work that's already happened before you've received your funding award, we cannot cover. anything to do with internal staffing, project management, or engaging with the consultants we can't cover. And then anything to do with construction, operation, maintenance of a heat network, that sits outside the remit of the revenue grants as well. So in terms of who can apply, it's essentially we are looking at heat networks that already exist. So they need to be operational, and it's either district or communal heating systems. So district being supplying to multiple buildings, communal being one building but with multiple customers within that building. The heat network must be situated in either England or Wales. And essentially the organisations that can apply are quite broad. So anyone in the public sector, private sector, third sector. We do also fund hospitals, universities, housing associations. So yeah, so a broad range of applicant types. But essentially the organisation that is applying must be the organisation that has the authority to sign off on investment decisions. So this is particularly relevant for the capital side because obviously there is matched funding that needs to be put forward. So we need to be clear that the organisation that will be responsible for providing that much funding is aware that they are committing to this if they submit an application. But also on the revenue side, a consultant cannot apply on behalf of their client. It must be the client themselves, because again, ultimately, we would want the organisation to at least be open to taking forward some of the recommendations in the report. There's no requirement to do so, but obviously we want to make sure that they're aware that this report is being requested and paid for, and that there is some willingness to read it and consider the sort of contents of the report. Again, it's also worth making sure when you're submitting, we ask for bank details, because obviously if you're successful, we need to be able to pay grant funding to a bank account. It's important wherever possible that the name on the bank account aligns with the name of the organisation that's applying. If for whatever reason that isn't the case, so for example, we've had resident associations where they have a managing agent in place, and the managing agent has a bank account for the resident association, then we just need that to be explained to us so we can be clear why the details don't match. Okay, so next slide talks about funding round dates. So we're in round 11 now. So the closing date for this funding round is the 6th of February. You need to apply online on an online application form. You need to request access to that application form. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. But the last day to request access to the application form will be the 23rd of January, so 2 weeks before the closing date. And that's just to make sure you have time to complete the application form to a high standard when you submit. We also have planned round 12 and round 13. So we expect to open round 12 on the 30th of March and expect to close it on the 22nd of May. And then we're looking at round 13 to be sort of closing in October time. So there are future funding rounds expected. Next slide. So also just as again, I've mentioned this guidance for applicants document a few times now. It really is worth reading. It gives a lot more detail about the scheme. We issued a new version on the 1st of December to align with this funding round. At the end of the document, we list out what changes have been made from the previous version. But some of the points on here explain some of the key changes that we've made. Key things to pick out from here. So for example, in terms of funding exclusions, looking at secondary network only applications, they we cannot accept applications where the secondary network is just a single building with only one customer or one user of the heat, because ultimately, if you were just to look at that building in and of itself, it's not a heat network, it's just a building. So if you are looking just to submit a secondary network only application, it would need to either be a multiple buildings or a single building with multiple customers within it. Some of the other things on here, so in terms of the funding for capital funding, we've added in an extra section now on the funding request table that focuses on what we call other capital costs. So that includes things like project management costs of external consultants, contingency, risk levels, things like that aren't necessarily specifically related to particular pieces of equipment or kit or installation things. So they are now explicitly called out in the application form, so it makes it clearer for yourselves as applicants and for our assessment team where the kind of other additional costs are being put on. We also ask some questions around the supply chain, so things around use of SMEs, so small and medium enterprises if known, and also make some models of proposed equipment that you're looking to install. So you may or may not know this at this stage, but if you're, for example, looking to install HIUs, do you know which models or makes of HIUs you're planning to install? So we just ask a few more questions on that side of things. And there's also a bit of update around legislation and other industry initiatives. So a bit more information about how HNES relates to HNES. Again, some slight changes to the metering and billing requirements and how that interacts with HNES as well. So it's worth having a look at the document, even if you've applied before, because there are some changes to it. Okay, so just to give you a bit of insight into what we've funded previously. So we are obviously talking about round 11. We've currently completed rounds 1 to 9 in terms of awarding the funding to those in those funding rounds. So we're now at almost 400 heat networks have been funded. And we've awarded over £65 million to both capital and revenue projects. So yeah, a good outcome of the funding rounds previously. I would say the scheme is very popular. It is a competitive process. We do get a significant number of applications each funding round. So yeah, it's a popular scheme. On the next slide. So just a few of the kind of measures that we've funded. So we've looked at things like improving and replacing pipe work, both in primary and secondary networks. Improving insulation. So again, that could be on pipe work. Yeah, even in the energy centre. Looking at controls. So things around pumps or yeah, temperature controls, different things like that. Replacing, recommissioning HIUs are also things that we have funded. And then more sort of other areas such as water quality, so measures to improve the water quality and reduce the kind of impact that poor water can have on the performance of a network, reducing leaks if there are, or sort of, I guess, addressing bypasses or things like that where water's being used unnecessarily. And the little dots on the map show where the funded projects are. So again, a good spread across England and Wales. But yeah, we're always looking for more applications. And then just a bit of more focus on round 9. So in that particular round, we had £8.4 million awarded to 69 heat networks. There's a link at the bottom of this slide to our press release for this particular round. If you click on that, it will take you to our website, and then there's also the press releases for the previous rounds as well, and that gives you a bit more information about the types of measures that are being installed for capital projects, and the kind of range of organisations that have received funding. So it's worth having a look at those as well, just to give you an idea of what's been funded previously. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Katie now for the next section.
Hi everyone. So I'm just going to talk to you about the optimization studies, which are relating to the revenue funding, what Louise was mentioning earlier. So for the final optimization report to be submitted, we do look for 2 to 3 parts to be included. The first one being work package 1. Again, this is also in the HNES guidance for applicants. Please refer to Annex A for a bit more in-depth detail on this as well. But the work package 1 basically is to investigate and assess the network's current operational performance and the conditions of the network. So this is required in order to develop a baseline against the optimization measures that can be developed and the impact they'll have, which is quantified in work package 2. This is important as well, so that the heat network operator understands the causes of any of the suboptimal performances the heat network has been going through, and the impact these have on the operation of the network and its customers. The steps for this include the site visit, which we will need pictures, diagrams, or descriptions of the heat network, and the baseline data of the network performance and KPIs. They must cover the assessment of the whole network architecture, including the plant room, energy centre, primary, secondary, and tertiary network, and customer interfaces. The KPIs are important because they'll form the basis for considering the benefits and the cost effectiveness of proposed optimization recommendations, which are proposed in work package 2. So it's good to get so when the consultant arrives at the heat network for the site visit, it's good to gather all this information, because it will lead on to a strong part for work package 2. And on to the next slide, please. Work package 2 then is about network optimization opportunities. This one's aim is to identify and develop the potential optimization measures, and to quantify the costs and the impacts of these measures, and what they could have on the heat network performance. So in this, the heat network operator will receive a report with a robust analysis of the recommendations offered, and they'll be shown a course of action on to improve the operational performance and customer outcomes. So this is basically to have a better understanding overall of the heat network, any issues it's been facing, any of the data being received. This will allow the consultant to pull through any sort of individual measures and packages of measures. So things like Louise mentioned earlier, replacing pipework, insulation, or some measures need to be combined to have a greater effect. This will all be within the work package 2 section. The steps for this then are the development of the optimization measures that we were just mentioning in terms of the packages. It is important to have a rundown of the costs for each measure and packages of measures, so you can have a better understanding of what works best with what, and in case budget comes into it, you can discuss about working what will improve the efficiency most likely, but also help your budget as well. Within this, it'll expand on reporting and recommendations. We do ask in this part for the baseline data and optimization measure results to be put in a table to reflect the reductions, for example, in carbon emissions, heat losses, things like that. Any of the baseline data you'd gathered previously, we want to see this against the measures installed. So if this measure is installed, what will be the benefit of this happening? So we do need a breakdown of the KPIs for that as well. You can again find this in Annex A, an example table. We do understand not all the measures will be relevant to each heat network, but try and get as much of those as you can within the table. Onto the next slide. So the final deliverables for this then, so we need the project report, which includes the work package 1 and 2 and the techno-economic analysis. It includes the summary of the site visit, and we also need, which is very important, the techno-economic analysis spreadsheet. This needs to be in an unlocked Excel document format, where there was a breakdown of costs for each measure, the total costs, including any contingencies and prelims, and this should be editable, be available to be editable by the heat network owner if they need to adjust anything, which can be discussed with the consultant as well. The next part, once the optimization report has been provided and reviewed, we need a final submission of the revenue M&R worksheet, which includes the optimization study outputs. And then once we've received all of that and everything's happy to be signed off, we do advise if you're happy to go forward to complete a capital grant application form for the next round. I'm now going to talk a bit about the application process. So I'm just going to run through the sections that are within the application form, just so you're aware of what, the information that you need and what you need to fill out. In this section A, this is about the application information. The application organisation information and parent company is relevant, and any contacts relating to the application. So this will need to be the primary contact for the heat network and a secondary contact that will be the contacts that will be reaching out to throughout the assessment process. Please also ensure the applicant name matches the legal entity name exactly. So as mentioned before, it does need to be it does need to match what is listed on Companies House. We also ask to ensure that the VAT number is included if your organisation has one. If they don't, please input not VAT registered. But it is very important for our checks, and further down the line, there's some supporting documentation that would require finance information. On to section B then, about the project information. This will include a description of the network, including its address and the network characteristics, so a proportion of dwellings that fall under the HNES definition of residential customers in need, the supply chain information, for example, the O&M contractor, metering and billing provider, and the regulatory information, so whether you're registered under Heat Trust, HNMBR notifications, Energy Ombudsman, and Ofgem digital service. It is required to register the heat under the Heat Trust registration, and you need to check whether you do need to notify under the heat network metering and billing regulations as well. As for the Energy Ombudsman, it will be a requirement if you haven't already registered to have that in place before you progress. Project C, in terms of the project narrative then, is we were looking for an overview of the project and the funding request. We would like to see the network data availability, quality and metering. Basically, in the project narrative, it's your chance to tell us all about the project. We do ask for you to be as detailed as you can and cover all the information that is asked within this tab, so it can be used in the assessment as part of your project plan. We do also ask you to provide a rationale of how your application applies to our objectives. So our objective 1 is in terms of reducing carbon emissions by making networks more efficient, and objective 2 is reducing customer detriment. There is also the dissemination information. So we'd like to know how you plan to communicate with any sort of, if it's say for example, if it's for a capital application in terms of match funding, whether you have leaseholders, freeholders, or anything like that as permission. If it's in terms of a revenue application, we would for the site visit, they will need to access the tertiary part of the heat network. So it would be good for the residents to know or be aware of this. So we do need that information of communication as well. On to the next slide, please. And as for the section D, which is about baseline and target information, we do ask for this part, please enter as much information as you can. Especially if it's a measure you want to improve on as part of your application, then we will need to know the baseline data currently, and as well as the target KPI you're looking for. If you don't know these numbers, they can be calculated, but we will need a rationale on how you calculated them and how you came to those numbers. And we will say sometimes the target might be the same as baseline. If so, it still needs to be entered within the target section as well. Within the application form in the portal, because it's an online application, there are mandatory cells to be completed in the capital applications. However, for revenue, we only need baseline data, not target data. We do also understand for a revenue project that you might not know a lot of this information, which is why you want an optimization study to have a better understanding. But we still would advise trying to gather as much data as you can. In the section E then, for funding and procurement, for this we need the total application budget and the funding request. So for revenue applications, this can be between around £15,000 to £24,000, which is the usual bracket for optimization studies. If it does go above that, we will ask for justification as for that, and it will be taken into account in the assessment. I would also say you need to separate the VAT costs from the total project costs, so you're aware of how much the project costs and the VAT amount separately, especially if VAT is irrecoverable, and you need to add that into the section E, section where there is a part where it says where you can claim VAT if it is irrecoverable. If that is the case, we will need supporting documentation to explain why you find why you're unable to recover VAT, so we will need evidence of that. On the capital side, it is broken down into different network areas, as well as the new section of the other section for, as Louise was mentioning earlier, the any additional costs like prelims, contingencies, things like that. We do need procurement information, so any procurement milestones, a description of this, start dates, end dates, and how long you think the project is going to take, as well as the use of heat network exchange and in planned use of SMEs and proposed contractors and consultants. We also need to know the makes and models of the new equipment as well. It is important to have an understanding of the end date and whether you're able to stick to that, because as Louise was saying before, the funding that you've requested in the financial year is important to be spent in that financial year, or it could be lost. And again, if you've split it over a few financial years, we need to be confident that you'll be able to achieve what you're looking to achieve. As for section F, this is the confirmation section, so confirming that you've provided all the support and evidence required, so things like the AP1A supplier form, which is the finance information. You've got a letter of authority, so a sign off from the heat network organisation or owner from who is able to make the investment decisions, and applicant's declaration. I'll just move on to supporting evidence before I know, sorry, I can see that Louise is replying to some questions. Apologies if I'm rushing through it. We'll do have a Q&A at the end as well. As for supporting evidence then, so for capital grants, we need evidence of the application costs. So we do need any quotes that have been gathered. This should include all of the measures that are planning to be undertaken, any of the prelims and contingency costs. We do need evidence of this. Because of how we assess the applications as well, it needs to be provided prior to when you submit the application, instead of gathering the information during the assessment process, because it can delay things. And we also need evidence of targeted benefits, so any improvements it will make to the heat network and how they've been achieved, how they've come about. Again, any signed letters or letters confirming things like the name of the applicant organisation, and they have the authority to sign off on the investment decisions, applicant support for the application, match funding, acceptance of the monitoring and reporting requirements, which we'll go into in a bit more detail later in the later slides, and confirmation where relevant of any other subsidies relevant to the project. We also need a summary program of the works and any confirmation, where applicable, of eligibility of metering costs. So relative to the HNMBR requirements, so the heat network metering billing requirements we mentioned earlier, and any communication methods that you'll be using to let the funded project know. So again, any residents, any leaseholders, freeholders, and everything like that may need to cover the match funding. Onto revenue grants. So for the supporting evidence, we'll need evidence of the application costs. So again, we'll need quotes of how much the optimization study is going to cost. Again, a signed letter from a person of authority. Match funding if relevant, but again, if that goes above the 24,000, that will be discussed in the assessment process. Acceptance of the monitoring and reporting requirements, because this is also a requirement in revenue grants as well, and confirmation of any subsidies for any other previous projects. You do also need to provide the AP1A form, which is important for both, because this is the information that where the money, if successful, will get paid into. So the bank account will get paid into, so that does need to be correct and accurate. And again, we need any evidence of communication methods. On to the next slide, please. As for applying for multiple projects under HNES, you can submit multiple projects for the same funding round. However, you will be asked to explain how the heat networks differ and why you can't use the knowledge gained from one optimization study and apply it to the other heat networks. So if they are significantly different, you can submit multiple applications. If they are similar, we do encourage you to just submit one and use the lessons learned from one and apply it to your other heat networks. For capital grants, and submitting multiple applications as well, we say consideration should be given as to whether the capital works are similar in nature, and whether running projects sequentially rather than in parallel might benefit you or not. So take that into account. As for submitting further applications, after funding has been awarded in previous rounds, would you ask that the applicants explain how many lessons learned from the previous studies have been used and why they can't apply these to new applications? So again, any differences in the heat network, why the lessons learned don't apply to the heat network you're applying for in future rounds, and in terms of capital grants, we do say if any of the lessons learned in the previous projects for them to be incorporated into the new applications, so where that's applicable. We do encourage as well capital applications from heat networks that have previously been awarded revenue funding to help implement the recommended capital measures. As I mentioned earlier, we can fund up to 50%. So we do encourage people to apply for capital funding after they've worked out what will improve the heat networks. I'll now pass on to Louise again about submitting an application.
Fab. Thank you, Katie. Apologies, I've been typing away in the background to try and answer some of the questions. So yeah, I'll leave my responses to that now and go back to the webinar. So I'm going to very quickly share my screen, which will show you the application portal itself. So if you are wanting to submit an application, you can email into hnes@gemserve.com and request access to an application space. And you'll then be given access to the portal, so it looks a bit like this. Obviously, this is just a demo with some test projects. So if you applied in round 10, and you're now looking to apply again in round 11, you'll still see your round 10 projects. But you won't be able to edit them or make any changes to them unless they are open for clarifications, but that's a completely different thing. So yeah, so you'll still see any projects that you've ever been assigned to will be on your dashboard, but in the live system, this would say round 11, not SP12, and it's set as application draft. So if you scroll across, you'll see that we have this button here. This means that the application form is editable, and you can go in and make changes to it and complete it. We also have two other buttons here. So this one is for documents. So if I click on this one, it takes you through to a page with some test documents in here. If you are we do require you to submit supporting evidence. So, for example, evidence of quotes that you've received, your project plan, your AP1A bank detail form. So you'll need to upload them in here. So you click upload, you select the file that you want to upload from your computer, and then you upload the document here. Once you've submitted your application form, you are no longer able to upload any documents, so that the whole application form is locked. So it's really important that before you press submit on your application form, you make sure you've uploaded all your supporting evidence into this area here, so that we can then assess those documents as well. This one here just gives you, I don't think we'll see anything at the moment because I've not completed the application form yet, but this will give you a summary of the application form, the sort of content that you've provided in the application form to date. So at the moment, I've just got a blank form at the moment. So if I click on this button, this takes me through to the application form itself. So the first page is just some notes and guidance information. If you press next, you then get through to the application questions themselves. You can then start entering your information. So test 1 of the organisation, if you're a local authority or a housing association or whatever sort of organisation you are, you then have to put in your company number, whatever that is, and your VAT number if you have it. And so you go through and you start completing the form. There's a button up here to save your progress. We recommend that you save your progress regularly as you go through, just to make sure that you don't lose any of your work. You can skip through each of the sections. So you'll see here, there's these little red asterisks, which obviously mean that things are required fields before you submit, but you are able to skip through to the next section without having completed those red asterisk questions. That's so that you can have a look at all of the questions. You might need to go away and get some information to help you complete it. So we didn't want to restrict people from being able to see the whole form before they've so essentially, when you get to the end of the application form, if I scroll through right to the end, you'll see here, if I press submit now, it reminds you that you're not able to edit your application or upload any associated documents. If you press OK, it hasn't submitted because we haven't completed all of the required fields. So there is validation on that. So you will only be able to submit an application that is materially complete. And then these steps are essentially split up into the sections that Katie has talked you through previously. So funding and procurement. So all the different sections that you would need to complete. This is a capital application as an example. So that's basically how the online form works. I'm not going to talk you through all the questions now because we don't have time, but if anyone has any specific questions about the application form itself or any other questions, then please do email us and we can answer those specific questions. It's worth noting that you can have multiple applicant or multiple people assigned to the same application form. So if you've got consultants, for example, that you might want to use to help you to complete the application form, or if there's other people in your organisation that you're sharing the workload with, you can have multiple people assigned to an application form, but only one person can edit the application form at a time. So if I'm in here and editing the form, no one else can be in there editing. So it's just worth making sure that and the other person, if someone is trying to get in, they'll get a message to say this is locked for editing by this other person. If you need access, please contact them so they can come out of the form, basically. It's just to make sure that people don't overwrite other people's works and data gets lost. So you'll see now, if I go to here, you can see the information that I put in, and so it gives you a good summary of the application form and what you've completed and filled in now that I've actually completed something. And you'll be able to see up here who the applicant is and when you last sort of updated the form. So yeah, that hopefully gives you a quick view of what the system looks like and how to use it. Again, like I say, if you do have any questions as you're going through, please do email hnes@gemserve.com and we'll be able to help you with any questions that you have. If we go back to the slides now. Wonderful. So I think I've just got a couple of recap questions or points. Yeah, so make sure you save as you go along. Only one person can edit, and it's really important to make sure that you upload your supporting documents before you press submit, as the portal will, or the application form will then be locked for editing. So as I've said, if you want to apply, email hnes@gemserve.com. We will ask for some detail about your project, so things like the name of the project, the organisation name, who do you want to give access to, so the contact details of those people, so that we can then set up those spaces. Once we've set up the users and the spaces, you'll get an email from noreply@talansm.com. It will have a temporary login link. This expires after 7 days, so please make sure you do click on that as soon as you receive it. You'll be prompted to change your password, and then it will be set up from that point on. You'll also receive a separate email from hnes@gemserve.com with your application pack, and just confirming that the space has been set up. So that will be your other prompt to look for an email with a login link. It may go to your junk or your spam folders, so please do check those before contacting us if you haven't received it. And as I mentioned previously, the last date for requesting an application space for this round is Friday, the 23rd of January. So 10 days from now, please get your requests in and we can set up the spaces for you. Right, I'll hand back to Katie to talk about the assessment process once you have submitted.
Great, thank you. So we're just going to talk about the scoring criteria now. There's two important parts, so it's deliverability and network performance improvement. On the deliverability side, we want an explanation on the via program plans on the cost certainty and the delivery certainty. So basically, how confident are you that you can spend the funding in those days that you've said within the application form, and we need to know how confident you are that you're able to spend the amount that you've requested, whether it's correct and if it's possible in the time frame that you've given for the project, especially within each of the financial years as well. We do ask for supporting evidence such as Gantt charts and things like that, and quotes as well for the cost certainty. In terms of the network performance improvement, we need to know how much you're improving, so what you're improving from your baseline data and evidence to support those figures. This is basically to help us understand how big an improvement can be expected from the funded measures. Also under the network improvement, it's worth noting that if you have had an optimization study that shows greater improvement is possible than what you're applying for in your capital application, we'd want to understand why you're not implementing all the measures that can make the biggest improvement, what decision has been made to reduce the ambition of the project and why, and whether this is part of a longer term project. So will more measures be implemented at a later date? Is it a funding issue? Things like that. You should also be aware of things like HNES tests. So the technical standards have now been released, although they are subject to consultation. It's important that you have a look and are looking into putting forward projects that you'll get as close to the levels of performance that are required in the technical standards. We'd also want to know as well if you're not able to reach these levels or increase the efficiency of or if the increase of the efficiency improvement is small, would need to understand why that's the case. So again, just in the more basic writing on there, reduce cost to the operator. We need information on that. Improve network efficiency, heat loss reduction, reduction in unplanned outages, gas and electricity savings, and quality of support information. On to the next slide, please. So the scoring criteria, again, for the capital applications are based on the project narrative, value for money, and the data availability and the baseline data. In the project narrative, we're looking for a good rationale for the funding with regards to HNES Objective 1, as well as HNES Objective 2, which we mentioned earlier, is to do with the reduction in carbon emissions and customers in need, as well as the approach to disseminating information. As for the value for money, the cost of carbon abated, cost of gas savings, and cost of electricity savings. Would you want quantitative information on this and whether it aligns with your savings as well as indirect? It'll be good if you consider indirect savings as well. As to the approach to disseminating information, back on the project narrative, it might have been mentioned earlier, within the portal it is a new question that is a requirement to show evidence of the methods used, so to keep that in mind. As for the data availability, so we're wanting to know where you've got it from. Is it estimated or is it from meters? And also to clarify how reliable this is. And that covers the meter data, operational data, and analysis. On to the next slide, please. As for revenue applications, the same applies. Again, there still is the question in the portal about the approach to disseminating information. As I mentioned earlier, we understand you might not have all the data available, which is why you might need the optimization studies. So we do take that into account in the assessment, but please provide as much information as you can. And on to the next one. As for the timescales then, so weeks 1 to 11 is the assessment period. This is from the submission deadline, so that'll be from the 6th of February. It also includes the clarification period and the submission of assessment outcomes to the HNES Investment Committee. We do say it's really important that you're available during this time, because when we're submitting clarifications, it's usually between weeks 1, 3, and 5, but it is important to stay on top of responding to the clarification questions so that the assessment can continue to prevent any delays. Weeks 12 to 16 is a review of the assessments by the HNES Investment Committee, including any additional clarifications and leading to a decision of the funding award recommendation. So that is looking to be around the 27th of April to the 29th of May. Weeks 7 to 18 is the internal approvals of the funding recommendations by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, which is beginning of June till the 12th of June. And weeks 19 is the confirmation to all applicants of successful and unsuccessful applications. Again, we do aim for the 15th of June to the 19th of June, but depending on the assessment process, dates can change. They're only indicative. Weeks 20 is the issue of the grant funding agreements to successful non-local authority applicants. We do give a 2-week period for these to be read and signed, so please keep that in mind. And I'll keep these dates in mind to avoid any delays for signing new funding agreements. And in the final weeks, so 19 to 23, we need further approval for local authority applicants, and then we'll issue the memorandum of understanding to successful applicants, which should be middle of June to middle of July. And on to the next one. So back to the clarifications, as I mentioned just briefly in the other slide, it is very essential that the applicants are available during these weeks. So we do send out notifications once the clarifications have been raised via email to the primary and secondary contacts. So please ensure the contacts that you've provided there will be available during these times and are able to answer the clarifications or reach out to someone within the organisation or consultants who can. We do also say further clarifications may be raised as part of the IC process, so the investment committee process, which is typically around week 14. Again, there can be quick turnarounds from the questions being provided to when we need a response. It's usually around 5 to 7 days, so it is important to be available. Again, clarifications could be issued at any time during the assessment process, so weeks 1 to 16, but the initial first few weeks are very important in the assessment process, so if you can keep an eye on those, that would be great. And then on to the next slide, please. So the monitoring and reporting requirements, it is a condition of the grant funding to submit the M&R returns. The M&R returns are essential to track whether the grant funding will be spent and also to ensure that the aims of HNES are being met. There is written guidance in the HNES guidance for applicants and additional guidance that we'll provide to you as well regarding the monitoring and reporting to successful projects. So on the revenue side, the M&R returns are required from the grant award until sign-off of the optimization study, and this is monthly. which will cover the project progress updates, any risks and issues, and a budget drawdown, as well as the final return to include the optimization study outputs annex. As for the capital M&R returns, these are required from the grant award until 24 months after the commissioning date. So that's initially it's monthly returns covering the project progress, risk and issues, and project drawdown, as well as quarterly returns covering any progress against benefits and KPIs for each of the previous 3 months. We do then say, so after the project has been completed, it changes from monthly returns to quarterly returns, just to keep that in mind. And then on to the next slide. So grant claims for non-local authorities, the grant funding can only be claimed retrospectively. So before we can pay out the money, we will need evidence of spend. This will need to include the invoices sent from any contractors, the remittance evidence to show the invoices have been paid, and the grant claim form to be completed, which aligns with the funded activities within the grant funding agreement. Also, where relevant, any evidence of match funding spend, if that's the case in either revenue or capital applications. As for local authorities, the grant funding can be claimed upfront as a lump sum once the MOU has been signed. However, if there is funding across multiple financial years, we will need evidence that the grant has been spent in the previous financial year before any further grant can be awarded. So keep that in mind as well in terms of your project timelines. And evidence of the project spent is required at the end of the project, and any funding that isn't used in line with the funding award will need to be paid back. So it is good to keep your M&R reports accurate and up to date, so we can keep an eye on that in case anything needs to be changed and the full award is not needed. I will pass back over to Louise for pre-application support, and again we can answer any questions regarding that. Thanks.
Right, so last section. So we do have a pre-application support team, and essentially applicants that are looking to submit an application can request help from this team. So we can discuss your projects that you're looking to submit. We can confirm whether particular measures would be eligible or not. We can have a look if you're completing the application form, if you've got specific questions, then we can address those as well. So if this is something that you think you would benefit from, and you want to speak to one of our relationship managers before you submit your application, then you can email hnes.support@gemserve.com, and we'll be able to put you in touch with one of our relationship managers. It's worth noting that we may also require some applicants to speak to a relationship manager before submission. That's simply from our side just to check that the project is sufficiently developed to be able to submit a good quality application. So it might be that following the discussion, we might suggest that you defer to a later round if you don't have the enough, I guess, or sufficient supporting evidence, for example, or clarity on what your project is looking to deliver. So we may reach out to potential applicants as well and ask them to speak to one of our team before submission. If we go to the next page, so just to sort of summarize where you can find help and support. So hnes@gemserve.com is the main email address. That's if you've got any general inquiries, if you want to access the application form, that's the email address to use. We do have our guidance for applicants document, which I have mentioned many times, so you have no excuse not to know it exists. We really do advise that people read that. It gives them much more detail about the scheme and really helps you to understand if you're eligible or not. If you want to hear more about future updates to the scheme, any future webinars that we're doing, any more information or changes to the scheme, you can sign up to our mailing list. So again, if you, I think I sent a link to our website further up in the chat when I was looking at the case studies. If you go to that page, there's also a sign up for the mailing list form that you can complete, or you can email hnes@gemserve.com if you'd like to sign up to that if you're not already. And finally, the last bullet point there is just to signpost you towards some optimization guidance that DESNES has produced. So there's a guide, and then there's also a series of videos. They look at different elements of the heat network. So there's one on water quality, there's one on the energy centre, there's a whole range of different components within the heat network that it might be worth having a look at if you really are sort of at the beginning of your journey, you're not really sure what to do with your network. They are some really good sort of sound bites and succinct elements of elements of a network that might give you some hints and tips as to how to improve your network yourselves. Okay, we've had a number of questions in the chat. I hope I've answered all of them apart from the last one that's just come in. So I will address that one now. This one's from Brian. It says revenue grants can be up to 100%. How is the proportion determined? So we will review the request. If it's over £24,000, for example, we might not cover all of that. The kind of our budget range sort of extends to £24,000. We might also look at the scale of the network, the level of inefficiency or sort of issues that the network is experiencing, and maybe question if you're requesting £24,000, for example, that's at the top end of the budget. Why does the network warrant such a large proportion or sort of top end of the budget when it's a relatively small network with potentially not many complex elements? So we could look to do a partial award on that basis if we don't think that the evidence we've seen justifies the grant ask, basically. Similarly, on a capital application, we could also do a partial grant if, again, we don't necessarily think that certain elements are eligible or the cost being requested is too high. So they're the kind of outcomes that you can receive. You can have full funding, partial funding, and obviously no funding, you've not been successful. So hopefully that answers that question. If anyone else has any questions that they want to raise now, feel free to come off mute and speak, or type them in the chat. Okay, there's another question that's come in. What proportion of the work can be carried out in 27-28? So for capital works, we do have budget available for 27-28. Applicants can apply to that for funding in that year. There's no specific sort of proportion. Obviously depends on the scale of the works, how long the works will take. So if it's a two-year project, and the first 6 months or few months of the first year required for sort of setup or procurement or things like that, then obviously maybe some of the work will happen in the 27-28. But what we don't want to see is, and actually within your funding agreement conditions, if you are successful, we need the work to start within 3 months of the grant funding being awarded. Now, when we say work starting, that could be commencing with a procurement. It doesn't necessarily mean digging or replacing pipe work or things like that. But what we don't want is people to apply now and then not actually use the funding that has been applied until 27-28 and not do anything for the next sort of 6 months, because ultimately that's taking away funding from another project that could start now and deliver benefits sooner than a project that's maybe sitting on funding. So in that instance, we would expect someone to apply in a later round when it's closer to when the project's actually going to be delivered. So we don't have a set proportion across the 2 funding years, but we would look at your project plan, and we would then understand whether your where you're putting your funding and the timescales that you're doing are appropriate and reasonable, as to whether or not we think that's a suitable way of delivering the project. So hopefully that answers that question. Rosie's question: do you require procurement to follow public contract regulations? We don't specify how you must undertake your procurement. That is for your organisation. You should follow your own procurement rules. We do, obviously, sort of best practice is to receive 3 quotes where possible. We appreciate that some organisations have frameworks or contracts, maintenance contracts, for example, in place already with organisations, so they wouldn't necessarily go through a procurement. We do also point people towards the Heat Network Exchange. So this is a sort of marketplace, I guess, where if you're doing particularly large procurements, you can advertise these procurements to the market ahead of the procurements going live, so that you can then encourage people to respond to your procurement. So that is something to look at as well. But from an HNES perspective, we don't specify how you must procure your work. Can HNES survey funding be applied to unmetered communal heating systems? So I've just seen Sharon, you've put your hand up. So let me just answer this question and I'll come to you. Yes, it can. If you don't have metering, we appreciate that actually a lot of the reasons why heat networks aren't operating efficiently and people don't necessarily know how to improve them is because they just don't have the data, they don't have the meters in place. So partly what we can fund within that 15 to 24 grand envelope is for the installation of temporary meters, so that your consultants can actually gather information about how the network is performing and be able to provide you with sort of better, more accurate recommendations and give you an idea of how your network's performing. So you don't have to have meters on your network already to apply for a revenue fund. And you can install temporary meters as part of that cost envelope if you don't have the data, and ultimately you'll get a better outcome as a result of that. Sharon, you have your hand up.
Hi, sorry, my question is a bit long-winded, so I thought I'd ask it rather than type it out.
That's fair enough.
We have a scheme where we've just finished the revenue side, and our consultant has given us, our work package 1 and our work package 2, and it has highlighted some issues that we obviously need to fix and stuff. But at the start of your slides, it says it doesn't do boilers and it doesn't do meters that were in the metering billing regs, which I think that includes like resident meters.
Yes.
So my question is, in the application, would you like to see our full picture? So would you like to see the stuff where it doesn't include like was not eligible for funding, like our boiler, what we're going to do with our boiler and what we're going to do? Would you like to see the full picture? Yes.
So what I would say on that is there's a narrative section where you can essentially tell us what's wrong with your network, what issues you're experiencing, and kind of an overview of what your project is going to do. I would say if you are doing elements, if your HNES funded elements form part of a wider program, it's worth telling us about that as well to give us that context so that we understand the bigger picture. But when you are looking at your costs, what I would suggest is only including the eligible items in that. Otherwise, it gets a bit confusing for the assessors as to what actually is the overall cost and how much, what evidence do we need for quotes and things like that. So I would say use the narrative section to tell us about your wider plans or your wider program, and then use the funding section just to focus on the HNES eligible costs. Katie, I can see you've put your hand up as well, so I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
Thank you.
Yes, I was just going to add as well, well, but sort of agreeing with you, Louise, but I have, in terms of the technical assessors, they also say in terms of your cost plan that you update in your supporting evidence, it would be good to have a cost plan that includes, like Louise was saying, all the measures that you plan to be installing as in the project as a whole, but then have a breakdown of in another cost plan of just the eligible measures. So again, so both within the application and supporting evidence, so that they can check the splits and costings and everything is right there. Otherwise they'll end up coming back with questions for why is this percentage here and what's missing from this, why is the overall project this much, and that kind of thing. So it would be good to have that in your supporting evidence as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No worries. Were there any questions? I think I answered all the questions in the chat. Hopefully everyone has access to the chat so they can see any of the questions. Was there anything else anyone wanted to ask, or if anything wasn't clear in the responses that we gave, then now's your time to ask. Not hearing anything, so I'm hoping that means that everyone understands. Oh, we've got another hand, David.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi there. Good afternoon. Just have a question. If we have had a study done that has outlined a number of potential improvements to a network, but the applicant's unlikely to fund all of them, or it doesn't have the funding in place to fund all of them, is there a rhetoric or is there a sort of scoring in terms of what options they look to take forward? So in terms of objective one being reducing the carbon emissions as much as possible, but that's not going to be possible under the amount of funding they have. So therefore, they'll only probably do what's most cost effective essentially to them. So in that respect, if we've identified a number of options, but they're not going to do them all, is it best for them to choose the ones that will get the greatest carbon emissions under their funding, or is there another sort of way that they're scored, or just trying to give the best advice to the client, I suppose?
Yeah, so we do look at, obviously, one of the things, if you are applying for capital funding, we would ask, and you've had an optimization study or an equivalent. You don't have to have done HNES revenue funding and got an HNES funded optimization study to apply for capital funding. You can go straight to capital funding, but we would expect you to have some kind of evidence as to why the measures you're proposing are going to improve the network and the extent to which they will improve. So we'd expect you to upload that as part of your supporting evidence. The assessors will review that, and if, for example, you aren't implementing all the recommended measures, we'd want to understand why. So again, in the narrative section, you can say, our optimization study recommended this whole list of optimization studies. At this point in time, we only have X amount of budget to do the first three. So we've chosen these three particularly for XYZ reasons. You might then say that we have over the next 4 years, we have a plan to incrementally sort of get to the point of implementing all the measures by the end of in 4 years' time, for example, but at this stage we're just focusing on this one element. So if that is the case, again, just explain why that is and what the limitations are within the organization to preventing you from being as ambitious as you might want to be, for example. Again, we do score. There is, as Katie said, there's a section on network improvement performance. So the greater the improvement in efficiency, the better. So if people aren't being that ambitious with what they are requesting, and particularly if they're asking for a lot of money that's not then going to show much of an improvement, you're going to score worse than someone who is asking for, say, less money, but is seeing significant improvements in the efficiency of their network. So it's just kind of putting that into the context. But we do recognise that, particularly on capital, where we're asking for match funding, people have only limited budgets or can only commit to certain amounts in certain years. So it might be more of a journey, and this is just one step on the journey. But again, if you explain that in your narrative, it gives the assessors that context to understand why that's the case.
Great, thank you.
And Jennifer, I think you got your hand up.
Hello, yes, we're planning to submit an application for round 12 capital funding, and I just wanted to ask about the spend profile for that, because presumably we would hear whether we were successful kind of in the autumn of the sort of October, that sort of time. And then
remind myself, I haven't thought about round 12 yet.
So perhaps it would be later than that.
So round 12 would close in May 26. So 4 to 5 months from there. So you're looking at kind of October time for finding out.
Would it be detrimental to our success in the application if we wanted to put all of our spend in 27-28?
Again, as you get further through the financial year, there is obviously less time to spend funding as we get closer to the end of the financial year. So I guess with October, you're still 6 months out from the end of the financial year. So we'd want to understand, why are you not able to start doing any work or spending any money in 26-27? What's the reasoning for that delay? But and again, it is a competitive process. So if someone comes forward and says, actually, we can spend money in this financial year, and we'll deliver the benefits sooner, then potentially they would be looked on more favourably than someone that's asking to delay starting the project, or sort of the project takes longer because it's being delayed into 27-28. So again, if there are reasons as to why that is the case, and whether that comes down to budgets or whatever, I'd suggest in the narrative section that you explain why that's the case, just to give the assessors that context. But again, it's a competitive process, so it depends what other applications we get. It depends how well you score in other areas of the scoring criteria as well, as to whether you would be successful or not. We always want people to start as soon as possible, but like I say, if there are legitimate reasons as to why that's not possible, then if you explain what that is, then that's fine. I'd say with that as well, again, to the point of the match funding and the grant funding not having to be spent at the same time, if you weren't able to secure match funding within your own budgets for 26-27, but you could secure it for 27-28, you could use grant funding from HNES in 26-27, and then your match funding in 27-28 potentially. So it's worth considering that as an option as well. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
No worries. We've only got a couple more minutes.
Yeah. I think that might be everyone. So if there are no more questions, I'd just like to say thanks everybody for coming. Hopefully you found the session useful, and as mentioned, we will be sharing the slides with you. So thanks for your time, and if you would like to follow our social pages, you can see both our LinkedIn and Twitter pages there, and you can also join our mailing list at hnes@gemserve.com. So thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.